about the Western. Not the hats, not the dust, not the six guns. The real Western lives somewhere deeper than its props. To understand it, you have to stop thinking of it as a single genre. Think of it as a spectrum. At one end sits the classic or traditional Western. Clear moral lines. Frontier justice. A mythic register where the good man wins because the story needs him to win. At the other end sits the revisionist Western. It deliberately deconstructs that myth. It lives in moral ambiguity. And it makes the reader pay for the violence the classic mode treated as righteous. Here is something important. The gap between these two ends is wider than almost any other genre spectrum. They are nearly opposite contracts wearing the same name. It is closer to the cozy versus hard-boiled split in mystery than to a smooth gradient. So before anything else, you have to know which contract you are writing. Now, why do readers come to the Western at all? Underneath every version of it is a single test. What does a person actually become when law, community, and consequence are thin or absent? The land strips away the social structures that normally keep behavior in check. And the genre's pleasure is watching a character's real character surface, once nothing external is enforcing it. Classic Western readers want the mythic version of that test. The code holds. The right man wins. Frontier justice feels satisfying because it is clean. Revisionist Western readers want the same test conducted honestly. The cost of the code is visible, and the myth doesn't get to look away from what it required. Same test. Two very different promises. So how do you recognize a Western on the page? There are a few hallmarks. First, the stranger arrives. A lone rider enters a settled or unsettled place and disrupts its equilibrium. Second, the showdown. A duel, formal or improvised, that resolves conflict through direct confrontation instead of institutional process. Third, the land as antagonist. Vast, harsh, indifferent terrain that tests the protagonist independent of any human opponent. Fourth, the code tested against survival. A personal rule the protagonist holds to, even when pragmatism argues against it. And fifth, civilization encroaching. The railroad, the fence line, the telegraph, the frontier visibly closing, often signaling the protagonist's own obsolescence. That last one works best as background pressure, not as a plot point. Picture a rancher who has never thought twice about a stretch of open land. Then he suddenly notices surveyors' stakes driven into it. That single image says more than any town meeting about the railroad ever could. Now, let's open up the subgenre map. This is where the Western really stretches. Classic or traditional, Western gives you the mythic register and frontier justice as a satisfying resolution. Revisionist Western gives you moral ambiguity, with the myth's cost left visible and unresolved. Neo-Western keeps the structure and the code of honor pressure, but moves it into a contemporary setting. Weird Western folds horror or supernatural elements into the frontier frame. Space Western transposes the frontier structure onto a science-fictional setting. And Western romance combines period social constraint with frontier stakes. Notice how flexible the skeleton is. The setting can change completely. The underlying test stays the same. The plot shapes follow that same logic. The stranger comes to town, disrupting and often redeeming or destroying a settled community. The last ride, where an aging gunfighter is pulled back for one final, costly act. The revenge trail, a pursuit across hostile land in answer to a specific wrong. The land claimed, where settlers, ranchers, and the railroad fight over territory. And the posse, a manhunt that tests group dynamics under sustained pressure. The character arcs run just as deep. The code tested, where a personal honor code either survives contact with the land or doesn't. The civilization reckoning, where a man of frontier violence faces a world that no longer has room for him. Redemption through violence, where a character is saved by the same violence that damned him. Revisionist Westerns interrogate that paradox directly, instead of letting it pass. And the land-shaped self, where identity is inseparable from the land, and the arc tracks what happens when that land changes or is taken away. So, where does the Western blend well? It pairs naturally with historical fiction, since it is inherently a period genre. It pairs with crime fiction through outlaw narratives and robbery plots. It pairs with horror, giving you the weird Western. It pairs with science fiction, giving you the space Western. And it pairs with coming of age, where a young protagonist is formed against a frontier backdrop. But here is where it fights. The real friction is internal. The gap between classic and revisionist matters more than conflict with any other genre. Drop a revisionist Western into a classic Western's mythic register, or the reverse, and it reads as a tonal failure, not a hybrid. So commit to one contract before you blend anything. Finally, a word about the most common pitfall: leaning on the hats, the dust, and the six guns as a substitute for the real work. The imagery is recognizable, but by itself, it is not the story. The story is what the land and its thin law actually cost the people living inside it. So, when you write your own Western, start there. Establish the land as a force, not a backdrop. Establish how thin the law is and what fills the vacuum. Introduce the protagonist's code before it is ever tested. And signal your tone immediately, because mythic clarity and deconstructive ambiguity are different books. Then ask yourself one question about your character's code. Does this frontier forgive a broken code, or does it remember? Answer that honestly, and you are no longer writing scenery. You are writing the Western.